Welcome to Vintage Church. If I've never met you before, my name is Dustin Turner, and I serve as the lead pastor of Vintage Church. If you're watching online, welcome as well. If you guys don't know, we have not been streaming for quite a while, but we are bringing back online streaming on Facebook, and so we're excited to bring some people into us. And as Eduardo shared earlier, we hope to see you in person real soon. If you have a Bible, turn to the Gospel of John, John chapter 4. And if you need a copy of God's Word, either in English or Spanish, just lift up your hand and our Connect team will get you a copy. We're in John chapter 4. Last week, we kicked off this series, and this is our Lenten series, where we are looking at the 7 signs of Jesus in the Gospel of John. One commentator described signs like this. He says, a sign points to something that is more important than itself. A sign points to something that is more important than itself. And so in the Gospel of John, Jesus does these, what other people call miracles, that the Gospel writer John calls signs. And the point is not the sign. The point is what the sign points to. And in this season of Lent, if you want to put a word down for Lent, I think one of the best words to describe Lent is this: return. But in order to return, you have to know who or what you're returning to. And so in this series, this Lenten series, what we're learning is who is Jesus and what do his signs point to. And if we know who Jesus is and we know what his signs point to, then that means we know who to return to. So in John chapter 4, we learn about this story where Jesus is approached by a guy who is an official. He's a government official. He might have been a Roman official. He might have been a Jewish official. And he wants his son to be healed. So John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. Listen to the words of John. So he, that is Jesus, came to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. That was last week. Jesus turned the water into wine at a wedding. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, unless you see signs, everybody say signs. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Everybody say believe. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The official said to him, Sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said to him, Go, your son will live. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, yesterday. At the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed in all of his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. What I want you to think about today are 2 simple questions. And in fact, there's a good chance that somewhere in your past or your present, you have thought about these questions, whether consciously or unconsciously. But I think these are questions that every single one of us, every one of us have to answer. Here's the first question. Do you have faith? I don't know if you noticed, as we were reading this passage, several times, over and over again, the word believe comes up. Over and over, Jesus says it. Over and over, the writer, John, says the man believed, the family believed. And so in order to understand whether or not you have faith, you have to understand what faith actually is. What kind of faith are we placing in Jesus and his signs. So here's the first element to faith. Number one, faith begins with knowledge. Everybody say knowledge. Faith begins with knowledge. You have to know about something in order to actually believe in it. Again, look at these first couple of verses, verse 47 in particular. When this man, what? Heard. There was knowledge because he had heard something about Jesus. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. At this point, Jesus is very early on in his ministry, but he is popular enough that people know he performs signs. In fact, people know that he had healed other people. So Jesus is returning to Galilee, which is north of Jerusalem, where Jesus had been. And this man, he was an official in some capacity, knew enough about Jesus that perhaps Jesus could heal his son. The popularity of Jesus had spread enough. And in fact, in this story, in the beginning of this story, the man is desperate. The word ask is more like beg. So Jesus approached the official approached Jesus, and he is begging Jesus, Jesus, please come to my son and heal him. Over and over again. Imagine that kind of begging. And all of it begins with simple knowledge. Knowledge that Jesus had done something miraculous. So the question for us is then, if faith begins with knowledge, what do we know about Jesus? Because we can't believe in Jesus, we can't have faith in Jesus unless there are some things we know about Jesus. Whether you're a Christian or not, you know stuff about Jesus. There is almost no one that denies Jesus existed. Believe it or not, there are a small handful of people out there that actually think Jesus never lived. But even the most skeptical scholar, for the most part, believes that there was a guy named Jesus who lived in the first century around Palestine, around in Israel. And for the most part, most people believe that this guy named Jesus ended his life in crucifixion. Now, they doubt and they debate how or why he was crucified. But everyone believes that Jesus was a teacher, that Jesus was some sort of maybe humanitarian, that he was kind to the poor, that he perhaps did some sort of sign, some sort of miracle, and that he died on the cross. I remember growing up, I came to faith in Jesus when I was 9 years old. And my parents were not churchgoers, and so we always had a lot of discussions in my house. My parents were not skeptical about Jesus. They believed in Jesus, but we believed very different things. And my mom and I would often get into debates about who Jesus was. And so my mom would be like, well, listen, Jesus was a great humanitarian. And I'd be like, sure, he was a great humanitarian, but Jesus said and did a lot more things than just being a good humanitarian. Jesus said other things about himself. That we just can't believe that Jesus is only a great humanitarian. We've got to believe more about Jesus. And the reason that I would have those debates, mostly friendly, not always friendly, with my mother was because at that age, and even more so now, I believe in what the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John say about Jesus. The Gospels were written so that we could reliably know who Jesus is. I could spend the rest of this message giving you evidence for why I believe you can trust what Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the rest of the New Testament, by the way, what they say about Jesus. It's reliable. Just one piece of evidence that I think is important. We have more manuscripts of the New Testament than we do of other ancient documents, like documents written by Julius Caesar or documents written by Greek poets that we trust. So if we have more New Testament documents, should we not trust some of the reliability of those documents? When you read the New Testament and when you read things about Jesus, one of the things that you will notice is how they align with what we know about first century Roman and Palestinian history. And so what I encourage you to recognize and hold fast to is that the Gospels were written so that we can reliably know who Jesus is. That even if we've not seen him face to face, what we read about him in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tells us something reliably about who he is. So faith begins with knowledge, but it cannot end with knowledge. A lot of people know about Jesus, but they don't believe in Jesus. Number two, knowledge can lead to confidence. Confidence. Listen to what happens in verses 49 and 50 of this story again. So the official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man did what? Believed. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. There's something that happens in these two verses. The official goes from begging to commanding Jesus. He says, "You need to come down before my son dies." And then Jesus responds more forcibly. And he says, "Listen, go. Your son will live. I don't have to go touch your son. I don't have to go see your son. I can heal your son from a long distance." And just by hearing that word, the official not only now knows something about Jesus, but has confidence that what Jesus says is, in fact, true. So here's the question for us, again, as we think about faith and how knowledge can lead to confidence. Why can we be confident in Jesus? The reformer John Calvin said it like this: faith is a firm and certain knowledge of God's benevolence toward us. It is trusting and believing that God is for us and not against us. And the reason that we can have confidence or be confident in Jesus is because of what he's done on our behalf. I told you just a few moments ago, even skeptical scholars will tell you that Jesus died on the cross. But the New Testament tells us why Jesus died on the cross. Jesus came to earth. God put on flesh, came to earth, and lived a sinless life, and went to the cross and died on that cross for the sins of humanity, my sin, your sin, our sin. Because the thing that separates us from God, that leads to not only physical death, but spiritual death, is our sin. God is holy, we are sinful. So Jesus dies on the cross. Does he stay dead? He doesn't. The New Testament tells us that Jesus rose from the grave. And if you're doubting that, in the Paul's first letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, "Listen, I can point to you right now 500 people that I have met and know that are still alive that saw the risen Jesus." The reason that you and I, that we can have confidence in Jesus is because of what he has done for us in saving us and giving us life. We can be confident in who he is. We can be confident in Jesus by knowing who he is and what he's done for us. And the reason that can translate into not just our present, but also into our future is just think about how you judge people on a regular basis. Past predicts what? Future. Past predicts future. The reason that you have confidence in someone right now in your life is that somewhere in the past, they've done the right thing. Their words and actions have aligned. In the same way, we can have confidence in who Jesus is because of what he's done in the past for us. So we can be sure of him in the future. So faith begins with knowledge. Knowledge can lead to confidence. But number 3, and most importantly, confidence should produce trust. Everybody say trust. It's action-oriented. Look at verses 52 and 53 again. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew, knowledge, that was the hour when Jesus said to him, your son will live. And what happened? He himself did what? Believed. And all of his household. The confidence that he had in Jesus when Jesus told him, go, your son will live, has now turned to a trust that Jesus did, in fact, do what he said he was going to do. Knowledge, confidence, trust. If you want to know what faith is, I think you could summarize faith in those 3 words. Knowledge, you have to know something about what you're believing. Confidence, you have to have a confidence in what you know. And trust, the confidence leads to action. And the thing about true faith is that it's never a one-time event. Faith is a lifelong habit. There will always come moments in your life when you will begin to doubt. You will begin to doubt who Jesus is. You will begin to doubt how good Jesus is. You will begin to doubt what Jesus can do for you. But your past knowledge of who Jesus is that produced some sort of confidence in the present and in your future should lead you to trust in who he is. Think about it like this. Almost every Sunday, week in and week out, you walk into this room, and for many of you, you have your seat. In fact, when we change the seat configuration because we're running out of space, you're like, wait, my seat's not normally there. But you walk into this room and you look at that seat, and without saying it, you have what? Confidence in that seat. Because you've done what before in that seat? You've sat in that seat, right? You have knowledge of the seat. Wow, look, that looks like a chair. And you have knowledge that chairs typically do what? Hold you. And because you have that kind of knowledge, and when you sit in that chair and you're like, wow, it holds my weight, I can be confident that this chair will hold me. So next Sunday when you walk in and you see that chair that you know about and you have confidence in, you trust that chair when you do what? Plop your butt down on that chair. It might be funny, but our faith in Jesus is no different. If Jesus has saved you, if you've trusted in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus in some moment in your past, you have confidence in him. Listen, you can trust him in your present and in your future. Are you sick? You can trust in Jesus. Do you have doubts? You can trust in Jesus. Is your marriage struggling? You can trust in Jesus. Do you have a family member that you have conflict with? You can trust in Jesus. See, Jesus gives us confidence and trust because of who he is and what he's done in our past, so that we know, regardless of what comes, we can trust in Jesus. Your biggest problem, my biggest problem, is none of those things I just mentioned. Our biggest problem is the fact that we are separated from God. Okay, you have to believe that. Otherwise, we're wasting our time here. And everything that I'm talking about and everything that you're writing down and everything that you're thinking about is false. So our biggest problem is that we are separated from God. God is perfect and holy. He wants to be in relationship with us, but we willingly reject him. Our sin separates us from God. So listen, if Jesus on the cross and out of the empty grave can reconcile us to God and bring us back, and we can trust in that death and resurrection, do you not think that Jesus could heal your marriage? Do you not think that Jesus could take that broken, sick body of yours and bring it back to life? Do you not think that Jesus can take that conflict that you have with a friend or a family member and reconcile you to them? Do you see how knowledge and confidence and trust work together? We can trust in Jesus. We cultivate a life of trust when we acknowledge our dependency upon Jesus for everything. Not this and this, but everything. Faith begins with knowledge. Knowledge should lead to confidence, and confidence should produce trust. Do you have faith? But it's not just that you have faith. You have to also ask yourself this second question: where is your faith? First, Jesus says this: is your faith in the signs and wonders? Go back and look at verse 48. Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Now, here's what's interesting about that one verse. The you that Jesus says, unless you see signs and wonders, it's not singular. He's not saying, hey, official, unless you see signs and wonders. He's saying you, plural. He's looking out at the crowd and he's saying, it's not just about the official now. Unless all of you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. And by the way, that's an indictment. That's not a statement of fact. Jesus is saying, I shouldn't have to perform signs and wonders just for you to believe. That's not enough. One commentator described it like this. He says, Jesus does not reject the miraculous as such, but rather rejects any demand for a miraculous sign and wonder. Again, another person says it like this: such self-disclosure by God should lead men and women to faith, so that they see the dramatic penetration of God in the world and praise and worship Him. But here's the problem. Those who witness these signs and who are captive to the darkness of this world will only see deeds of power, not divine deeds of revelation. See, what this commentator is getting at is that when you see signs and wonders, are you just wanting to see more signs and wonders? Like you just came for the act. And you're like, man, this is pretty cool to see Jesus do all of these sorts of things. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing him turn more water into wine. Amen? Mark just got that. But Jesus is like, that's not the point. The sign always points to something that's more important. Think about it like this. I know we're a little past this season, and I don't want to bring up Christmas too soon because that might jolt some of you into putting your tree up already and playing Christmas music too soon. But are you familiar with the movie Polar Express? You know that movie? And the kid goes to the North Pole, and what is his gift? It's a bell, right? And you remember, who can hear the bell? All the kids, right? All the kids can hear the bell, but the parents pick up the bell and they're like, this thing is broke. It doesn't work. Is the bell broke? No. Right? In fact, the boy says, like, listen, all of my life I've been able to hear the bell. My sister, she got to an age where she couldn't hear the bell anymore. And what Jesus is saying here is like, listen, the signs and wonders are like picking up the bell and being able to hear the ring of the bell all the time. That when you see a sign and wonder, it's not about the water turning into wine. It's not about the son being brought back to life. Later we're going to see it's not about Jesus walking on water. It's not about him multiplying the fish and the loaves. It's not about him raising Lazarus from the dead. It's about saying something about who Jesus is. And that if that is who Jesus is, we can have faith in him. Without Jesus, the signs mean nothing. They mean nothing. So is your faith being placed in the signs and wonders, or is it being placed in Jesus? Because there's a difference. If you're placing your faith in Jesus, that means you're beginning to think about and trust in his character and his actions. Which means you have to know who Jesus is, which means you have to read what? The Gospels. If you want to know who Jesus is, read the Gospels. And what we learn about Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is that Jesus is a holy, loving, compassionate, kind, just, faithful, wise, powerful person. We learn that Jesus is a prophet, that he proclaims the truth of God, that he reveals who God is. We learn that he is a priest and at the same time our sacrifice. That he died on our behalf, but at the same time presents and represents us before God. We learn that he's a king. That one day he will be a conquering king. He will return and rule and reign over his kingdom, making all things new. That's what we learn about Jesus when we read the Gospels, when we read the New Testament, when we read all of the Bible. But we also learn about Jesus and his promises. I love this story because of 3 words repeated 3 times. In verse 50, in verse 51, and in verse 53, Jesus says 3 simple words: your son lives. Is it not interesting? 3 times it's brought up in just less than 10 verses. Your son lives. And there's something very interesting in the Gospel of John. The idea of life is significant to the gospel writer. It's significant because of who Jesus is. Who Jesus is and what he has. Look at the prologue. It's the kind of John's introduction to his gospel. In John chapter 1, verse 4, he says this: in him, who's him? Jesus. In him was what? Everybody say it. And the what? Was the light of men. John says, in him was life. Jesus is the one who holds life. Yes, our physical life. Yes, the very breath in our lungs. But it's also the life that you and I long for. It's the life that we're looking for. It's the life that when we are looking at other things, whether they're people or places or things or addictions, we're longing for. And we say we want that life. And John is saying that it's only in him that we find what? Life. Only in Jesus. And then in John 10:10, when all of the people, all the Israelites are searching for life, they're looking at all the religious leaders who are weighing them down with commandments and rules and say, if you don't do this, you're damned to hell. And Jesus says, I have come that they can have what? Life. And then he qualifies that life. He calls it what? Abundant life. Anybody want abundant life? That's why we place our faith in Jesus. Because this is who he is. And this is what he promises. Right? Just imagine if all you're seeking after are the signs and wonders. Just imagine you're the official and your son is dying. And by the way, the word there for son is a small child. So think about a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old, someone who can't help himself or herself. And you're thinking to yourself, if my son could just live, and your son is healed, but you know in the back of your mind that there's going to come a day when what? Your son will die. When you place your faith just in the signs and wonders, you get a just brief moment of experiencing that life. But when you place your faith and trust in Jesus, you get abundant life. The signs mean something because of Jesus. Without Jesus, the signs mean nothing, but because of Jesus, they mean everything. Faith is trusting Jesus' word before seeing Jesus' sign. Faith is trusting Jesus' word before seeing the sign. Did you notice that about this official? That in this story, all he has to do is trust in the word of Jesus. All he has to do is say, your son is alive, and the guy believed. He comes back and he sees his son alive. Like, don't wait for the sign. Don't wait for the wonder. Trust. Place your faith, have faith in Jesus himself, and he will give you the life that you're looking for. Last week I shared this, and I think it's important to reiterate this because it's so important to understand how the Gospel of John fits together. At the very end of John's Gospel, he gives us kind of a summary, and he gives us the purpose. It's kind of the thesis statement, if you will, of what he's trying to do. And he says this in John chapter 20, verses 30 through 31. He says, now Jesus did many other what? Signs. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may what? That you may believe, and that you may believe that who? Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by what? Believing you may have what? Life. Life in his name. John says, listen, Jesus did all of these things, and I've just written down a few of them so you would know who Jesus is and you would be able to believe in Jesus. You would have knowledge about Jesus, which would lead to a confidence, which would compel you to trust in who Jesus is. And in believing, you would have life. The signs always point beyond themselves to something more important. So this season, as we are in Lent, I want to ask you these two questions again, and I want you to take these questions home, and I want you to reflect on these questions. Number one, do you have faith? And when I say faith, I don't mean, I believe in Jesus, I know who he is, but I want you to think about, do I have faith that begins with knowledge, that leads to confidence, that produces trust? For some of you, you need to reflect on that question, recognizing there has never been a moment of time in your life where you have genuinely and truly had faith in Jesus. And the only way to get to that place is you have to turn away. You have to, what the Bible calls, repent. You have to recognize this is who God is and this is who I am, and they're radically different. And I have to turn away from the way I have been living and then turn around to trust in Jesus, to have knowledge and confidence and trust in him, and to recognize that what he did on the cross for me can save me from my sin and bring me back to God and give me the abundant life that I long for. Some of you know all of that, and you believed all of that. And you trust in Jesus to save you from your sin, and you recognize that he's reconciled you to God. But for some reason, you've missed how Jesus can do that, but he can't heal your marriage. He can't heal your body. He can't heal your relationships. And you need to look anew at your faith and say, if Jesus can do that for me, why can't he do this as well? Do you have faith? But number two, where is your faith? Is your faith in the one we know as Jesus? Is your faith in the one who offers us promises that he alone fulfills? Because if you're placing your faith in anything else, it will disappoint. It will let you down. Jesus will never fail you. Ever. Trust in him. Where is your faith? Do you have faith? Trust in Jesus. Let's pray. Father, we love you. And we thank you so much for the signs you give us. We don't thank you for the signs, but we thank you for what the signs point to, who the signs point to. We thank you for Jesus, and we thank you that he is someone that we can trust. He's someone we can give our lives to, time in and time out. For those of us who lack faith, God, give us faith. For those of us whose faith is weak, increase our faith. And may all of us continue to look to Jesus. We love you, and we ask all of this in his name. Amen.